Acapulco, Mexico. This is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I've got a great guest coming in. It's Jimmy Song, one of the top developers for Bitcoin Core. He's got 17 commits to his name and very well known in the Bitcoin community. He's coming in from Austin, Texas. And we're going to be talking all about Bitcoin, some of the issues going on with Bitcoin right now, as we've covered before in the past about some of the issues about the expense of Bitcoin, the transaction fees, some of the time issues being quite slow. And we're also going to get into just the generality of what's so important about money and why Bitcoin is so important to the world today. And so it's going to be a great conversation. Happy to have you on, Jimmy. But before we get started, I got to ask you a question. How did you become an anarchist?
Well, I don't like labels, but I do agree with a lot of the things that anarchists stand for. Specifically, I think that governments suck at pretty much everything that they put their hands on. Like, they corrupt and make things worse for the most part. The two things that I would say governments are good at are collecting taxes and killing people, neither of which I like. So.
Yeah, extortion and killing people. Yeah, that's about what they're really actually good at. So yeah, we're on the same page generally on governance. So let's get into Bitcoin, though. This is a huge topic of conversation right now. Before we get into perhaps some of the issues with Bitcoin, let's talk about the importance of Bitcoin. I know that you really consider it incredibly important, sort of to humanity. Why don't you get into why you think that way?
Yeah, sure. So I see money as sort of like the base layer of civilization. Like, you need money or else civilization cannot exist. Every system that's tried to do away with that base layer fails horribly, right? Like communist systems and all, none of them ever work. And it's because you need trade. You need some way to store value, some way to like something that everyone agrees is valuable in order for everything to work. And if you don't believe me, go try living in Venezuela or Zimbabwe. It doesn't, like, those are two societies that have pretty much abandoned the money that the government sort of forces them to use, and you have all sorts of chaos, right? And for that reason, money tends to be very, very important. And when you have, like, I'm a technology guy, right? I'm a programmer. And when you have sort of like this base layer, everything else sort of builds on that layer. And I see civilization in the same way. You have money as sort of like a base layer, and, like shared values and things like that, maybe on top of it, and everything else on top of that. But when you have a corrupt base layer like we do in most of the world today with fiat-based money, everything else on top sort of gets corrupted, and everything else on top is just not quite optimized, or something's wrong with it, or you have to do other things to make it work, and that's kind of what we see. A lot of like the societal ills, at least in my opinion, that a lot of people see as societal ills, or like blame on like just sort of culture or something like that, I blame on the lack of sound money. So the fact that a lot of people are shallow and think very short term, and are consume way too much, like the obesity epidemic, everything like that, I see ultimately as a result of a lack of sound money. When you don't have sound money, you have very short time preferences. You have people that don't care about the future, that don't care about building civilization. So of course they're going to just like have a YOLO, you only live once kind of mentality, where they don't save for the future. They don't try to leave a legacy. They don't try to build up civilization. Instead, they just party and do whatever and have like very shallow demeanor about them. And it's something that a lot of people complain about. They don't really know the cause. And I think it's because there isn't sound money.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that you realize that, because most people don't. And it's so sort of hidden from people. And really that is the real sort of most evil sort of thing in the world today is central banking and unsound money. And most people don't realize it. And it's because they don't want anyone to know even how central banking works. And the people who generally control the central banks, they also control the governments. And they are actually very anti-human. They don't like humanity. They want it to be basically destroyed. They want to rule over all of us. And they understand that if you control the money and you make it an unsound money, you corrupt society completely, because every single transaction that occurs in society society has money in it. Every single transaction, half of that transaction is money. And because of that, if you corrupt that money, then you corrupt every single thing that happens in society, and they know that. So that's why Bitcoin's so important. And you brought up Zimbabwe and Venezuela. I actually haven't been to Zimbabwe. I plan to go as soon as I can, but I've been to Venezuela recently where we had backpacks full of money, and you can just see how it really corrupts and destroys society as they essentially print up so much money that it becomes worthless. And they've done that in Zimbabwe. I just saw a interesting sort of a video on it. Someone was in Zimbabwe, and most of the people, because they've again destroyed the money. Robert Mugabe has twice in 10 years destroyed the Zimbabwe dollar. And this time, a lot of people have started using something I think they call it EcoCoin or something. They've started using Bitcoin. Bitcoin actually trades way higher in Zimbabwe than anywhere else in the world because no one has access to any other money that actually works. And so they've started using something called EcoCoin, which everyone's been using. They're using SMS, text messages and stuff. So as usual, the market usually will find a way. And I just want to sort of let people know out there, because I hear this quite a bit. You hear from a lot of people who are more like hippies types and more love and peace types. They go, money is the root of all evil, and they might even quote the Bible, even though they might not even believe in the Bible or whatever, but they will say that, and it's actually not money. It doesn't say that in the Bible. It says the love of money is the root of all evil. So greed is in many ways a root of many of the evils in the world today. But money itself, as you pointed out, is incredibly important, and many of these people will also believe in things like what's it called, Project starts with a V. It's basically Marxism with robots, but they will basically say that we got to just get rid of money. It's like, yeah, if we, as humanity, if we can spiritually all rise to a level where we have we see ourselves all as one, and we don't have all these sort of like needs and interests that most of us have today, then yes, we can have a society without money. But we're not there yet. And so in the meantime, we really need money in order for society to have any sort of function whatsoever. Maybe I've just talked a lot there, but maybe you want to respond to some of those comments.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And here's the thing I said at the beginning, right? Government's terrible at most things, except for collecting taxes and killing people. Well, government's especially bad at managing money. And by having a central bank, like they control the money supply. Like in the United States, we always talk about, okay, is Congress going to allow the debt ceiling to go up? That's just a convoluted way of printing more money. Every time they raise the debt ceiling, that's just printing more money. And like people don't realize this and think, oh, okay, well, it's actually going towards this, and we can finance this other program. No, it's just the government printing more money. That's all it is. And they get to do more stuff, dole out more favors and things like that. And one of the things that I've come to realize as I've studied Bitcoin more and more is that when you have this corrupt conjoining of government and business, what the policies that they tend to espouse always end up in more consumption of goods, right? And it makes sense because businesses make money off of consumption. And if they are like bribing the government, they're going to try to add policies that will cause more consumption. And it's a very Keynesian mindset, right? Like where you have to just sort of continuously circulate money, and you need like the velocity of money to be high or something like that. And that tends to be one of the metrics that they use. But it's the complete wrong way to think about it. It's not all about consumption, as if consumption itself is a good thing. It's not, right? Like that's why people are overweight. It's because like, government and industry get together. Yeah, what are they going to say? No, eat less. No, of course not. They're going to say eat more of this healthier food or something like that. And this is sort of like the corruption. Like this is what happens when government and business get together. They make these bad policies, and the whole idea of sound money is that you can store wealth, but when government controls money, they can sort of inflate that wealth away from you, and that ends up being a tremendously demotivating thing for most individuals, because they start saying, well, why should I save? It's not, like a burrito 10 years ago was like $5. Now it's like $10, right? Like the government statistics on inflation are like, oh, it's less than like 1.2%, something like that. when you look at actual asset prices, it's like more than doubled. Actual inflation's like closer to like 10 or 12%. And people don't realize this, but your wealth is getting taxed away. There's a reason why the stock market is going up in price. It's not the stock market going up, it's the dollar going down. There's a reason why, you know, real estate prices go up. It's not because real estate prices are going up, it's the dollar going down. So you have this very corrupt base layer, and it's sinking everything else, right? As it sinks, everything else sinks, and it's anything that's real like tends to get propped up, but it's dragging down the rest of civilization along with it. And it's one of those things that people don't really realize because it's hidden from them, right? Like the entire Federal Reserve System is incredibly convoluted for a reason, so that people can't realize, oh, okay, well, this is actually a tax, and I don't really realize it. And one of the wonderful things about Bitcoin is that it's waking people up to this fact, right? It's like, oh, okay, this is something that I can store money in. And I don't know about you, Jeff, but like at least my friends that have gotten into Bitcoin, you know, they were living paycheck to paycheck before. But then they discover Bitcoin. What happens? They're like, well, do I really want to spend $15 on popcorn and a soda for a movie? I could buy Bitcoin with that, and I can like keep that value, right? It's not going to be inflated away from me. It's not going to be you know, taxed away from me. It's not going to be seized from me at a bank or something like that. Instead, I could keep that money. I have a motivation to add value to the world, add value to civilization, start my own business, do something that actually adds value instead of rent seeking off the government, which is more or less what most people like. You know, like. I find it hilarious that the American dream, so-called, is about, you know, like working for the same company for 30 years, which is more or less rent-seeking behavior, right? Like you're just rent-seeking off the governance of the company, or, you know, being a government bureaucrat, and then like, you know, living in a house with 2.4 kids and a white picket fence and all that stuff. This was not the case when we had sound money. Back in the 1800s, when we had gold as the standard, when people were, you know, trying to find opportunity, what did they do? They conquered the entire West, right? Like they built most of America with like railroads and like oil and all this other stuff. All this innovation came in the 1800s largely due to the fact that we had sound money. People were incentivized to create and add to civilization and make all these wonderful things. And to be honest, most of the 20th century is just like minor improvements on a lot of the stuff that happened in the 19th century, when you know, a lot of these like self-made men and women like were taking advantage of the fact that there was opportunity, that we had sound money. One of the things that I like to say is that scarce money causes an abundance mentality. Abundant money causes a scarcity mentality. And this is what's happening right now, is that a lot of people have a scarcity mentality. They feel like, okay, I have to rent seek off the government. I have to find my place in this thing where, you know, I'm going to get paid for not doing that much work. I mean, what are all these like government bureaucrats doing? Or like most of these businesses, they're rent seeking off the government. If they're doing that and you're an employee of one of them, you're rent seeking too, right? Like, and that's what a lot of people are doing, instead of like sort of an aspirational, like, you know, trying to make civilization better. That to me is what will make, you know, civilization last, instead of like crumbling like we've been doing for like the last 50 to 100 years.
Yeah, actually, it's been a little over 100 years since the Federal Reserve was founded in 1913, and that really was the beginning of the end of a lot of these things. And you brought up so many great points there. Most people just don't understand money. That's all on purpose. They're never going to teach you how money works in the government indoctrination camps, which is they send people to for 12 years of programming, and they never teach you that. I forget if it was John Maynard Keynes or Henry Ford. One of them said that not one man in a million understands inflation, and that used to be true. I bet it's more than 1 in 1 million now. It's probably closer to maybe 1,000 in a million or something like that, or maybe even a few thousand. It's growing, as you mentioned. People are starting to figure this out now. But Henry Ford did say that if people actually understood how the money system works, there'd be a revolution tomorrow. If they actually understood how it's destroying everything around us. And you brought up another great point as well about consumption, and that's what they push so much, is that the economy, the reason it's good or it works is because of consumption. That's the exact opposite of the truth. The way that anything improves is that people save. They produce more than they consume, and that's how we have more things. And it could be the internet, or it could be cars, or it could be planes, or it could be whatever you want it to be. But it's producing more than you consume is how you have good things and valuable things in your life. And we're not just eating berries and stuff like that. And people just don't realize how all this stuff works. And if they did, then maybe they change. And you bring up a great point that perhaps Bitcoin is starting to make people think about that. And it's kind of funny because environmentalists, they've been kind of attacking Bitcoin on the environmental angle. They try every single angle. First they said North Korea is using Bitcoin, so they tried the fake terrorist angle. And then they're like, well, Bitcoin's bad for the economy because it takes you could heat 6 million homes in the U.S. for the amount that it takes to create Bitcoin, or to continue Bitcoin. But in actual fact, as you pointed out, if we had sound money, there'd be far less this like conspicuous consumption of just consumption for the sake of consumption, because when you have unsound money, as you pointed out, people just want to get rid of it as soon as possible because they know that if they just keep it under their mattress for like 10 years, by the time they want to spend it, it's basically not worth hardly anything compared to what it was. And that's exactly what this unsound money does. And it actually just, environmentalists out there, if they're watching this, if you really care about the environment, you want to see less of this sort of waste and just people consuming things for no reason whatsoever, and just all sorts of plastic items just for no reason, you should be a huge proponent of sound money. And Bitcoin, of course, would be very sound money because, yes, it takes a little bit of energy to create and run the Bitcoin network, but it's really nothing compared to, for example, the Department of Defense, the run out of the pentagram, which is the largest energy consumer in the world, using it to actually destroy and kill men, women, and children around the world constantly. You brought up so many great points. I don't even know where to stop talking about them. But let's talk about Bitcoin itself, because you say we need a sound money. Now, what's happened in the Bitcoin world in the last year, as far as I can tell, is it seems to have been a move away from it being used as a actual money or a currency to being more of an asset. And I've heard many core developers talk about this and say, transaction fees are high, but that's okay. That means that Bitcoin is valuable. But I've also heard them say things like, it's okay if you can't buy a coffee with it. And what you're talking about here is the importance of Bitcoin as money. So how do you put those two together with Bitcoin?
Yeah, sure. So great question there. So if you think about money, there are sort of three main use cases, right? There's store of value, medium of exchange, and unit of account. And it helps to sort of think about the three of them in that way. So Bitcoin as a unit of account, it really isn't there yet. About the only things that seem to be denominated in Bitcoin are other altcoins, because Bitcoin tends to be sort of like the gateway to those. You need to buy Bitcoin to be able to buy Dogecoin or something like that. So of course it's denominated in Bitcoins. And the other are sort of like a niche product. It's called like physical Bitcoins. So Cassatius coins, for example. You have a private key under like a little tamper-proof or tamper-evident sticker, and you stick it on a coin, and it's worth 1 Bitcoin, something like that. Those tend to be denominated in Bitcoin. Everything else, it's pretty, it's not normal to price anything in Bitcoin just because of the volatility and things like that. So Bitcoin isn't really a unit of account yet. Medium of exchange. Bitcoin is not that great a medium of exchange, in my opinion. There are some use cases where it can be a very good medium of exchange. Darknet markets, where no other normal financial services go, that obviously makes sense because, it's about the only choice out there, that and cash, of course. But with cash, you have to actually physically exchange it. Whereas with Bitcoin, you can do it online. So there's some use cases like that, and perhaps like foreign remittances. If you're sending a large amount of money to Africa, Western Union will take 10%. There's no other real, that's where like Bitcoin can kind of compete because it's much less than 10%. So it makes sense there. Pretty much every other usage for medium of exchange for Bitcoin, I don't think are that great. Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, bank, debit card, whatever, those all provide the consumer a lot more protection, a lot more convenience, a lot, faster, getting of stuff or whatever, goods and services. So in a way, I don't see Bitcoin as a great medium of exchange, at least not yet. And there are sort of second layer technologies like Lightning and payment channels and things that may make that more of a use case. But pretty much everyone I know that buys Bitcoin, they're not using it to go get some drug from China using a darknet or sending money to Africa. That's not what they use it for. They use it as a store of value, right? And that's the third case. Store of value is the killer app for Bitcoin. You can work hard, make some money, and you can put it into Bitcoin. It's not going to degrade. There's a fixed supply. There's increasing demand. What do you think is going to happen to the price, right? And this is that particular property of there being a fixed supply and increasing demand is what makes real estate a very good long-term store of value, because they don't make any more land, right? And that means, as long as the world population is increasing, there's going to be increasing demand, and that means that price will generally go up. Now, that isn't the case in Japan, for example, because there's a decreasing population, so real estate prices have been falling for the most part. But it tends to be like that. That dynamic happens in Bitcoin, and that's a good thing. And store of value is what people use it for. And a lot of people have this false dichotomy. If you don't use it to transact, you're not really using it. That's not true. A lot of people hold gold and they use it as a store of value. And that is a very legitimate use case. Very few people actually use it to transact and buy something. I guess there are some people that turn it into jewelry or whatever. But that tends to be a very tiny percent of actual gold usage. And it's the same for Bitcoin. There are people that will utilize it to transact in and out of Bitcoin and into fiat or something like that, or to buy some good or service or something. But in general, they're using it because it's not wealth that can be confiscated by the government. It's not wealth that that can be inflated away by the government. It's something that you can hold and you control. It's a bare instrument. It's like a gold bar in your backyard, more or less. But it's a lot better because you can back it up. You can make it multi-sig, so you can't just control it with one person and things like that. It's a wonderful, wonderful store of value, possibly the greatest one that's ever existed, and that's the killer app. That's the thing that's valuable, not buying coffee, right? I suppose you can if you wanted to, but that's not what most people use it for.
But we just got finished talking about the importance of money and how you believe that Bitcoin is so important because of the importance of how important money is. But what you just described is that Bitcoin isn't really money.
Well, I said it was a store of value, right? Store of value. So money, again, three definitions, right? There are three properties of it. I believe it needs to be a very solid store of value before it can become a better medium of exchange. And medium of exchange is coming, but we're still in the store of value phase. And that's more valuable to most people, right? That's the base layer, that's part of the base layer of civilization, the ability to hold your wealth without it being confiscatable or inflatable, being inflated away by a government. And that's what Bitcoin has, and that's what most people find valuable. That's why most people change their mentality when they get into Bitcoin and stop living paycheck to paycheck and start saving, because they can hold it for a long time. It's not necessarily a medium of exchange can be useful, and it's not like there's zero medium of exchange value in Bitcoin. People can and do use it for medium of exchange. It's just that that's not the main use case. It does turn out that a lot of businesses, again, they thrive off of the medium of exchange aspect because, you need transactions in order to make more money as an exchange or a merchant or something like that. But that's not the main thing. And this was one of the things that happened with the 2x hard fork and the New York agreement, was that, it was mostly the businesses that wanted to enlarge the block size. Why? Because they make money off of transactions, right? And I mentioned this before. When government and businesses get together, they encourage consumption, and this was their way of encouraging consumption. And in a normal fiat system, the holders don't usually get to fight back very much. With Bitcoin, they fought back. They said, hey, you know what? We don't want that because it's not going to be as secure. And security is extremely important to all of the holders because it's the store of value. If the security is gone, then your Bitcoins can be taken away. So for them, having a larger developer ecosystem, having a more secure store of value was more important than a smaller increase in throughput of the actual transactions going through, or more consumption happening on the network.
You know, in August 1st of this year, Bitcoin Cash forked away from Bitcoin over this sort of issue of is Bitcoin going to be usable as a medium of exchange or not? And what's happened since then is, of course, segwit came in at the same time. And we've still, a lot of people said segwit would fix some of the issues with Bitcoin of being quite expensive to transfer and some of the time issues. It's sometimes, I think the average time is around an hour at the moment, but it's been like days at certain times with transactions. So what's your, excuse me, what's your sort of take? Because, for example, with the increase of the block size, that's really what it was about in August. Why couldn't Bitcoin have just increased its block size to 2 megabit or 8 megabit to increase increase the speed and lower the transaction fees?
Yeah. So first of all, segwit was a block size increase. So you get about roughly about at an optimum you get about 2 megabyte blocks. And really it solves so many other things and allows all sorts of upgrades in the future that it was kind of silly that the rest of the net, a lot of the miners and businesses were opposed to it. I really didn't understand that from a technical perspective. It was a block size increase and it allowed a lot more other things. But as far as why can't they just do X, Y, or Z, it's because there's no central party that controls that. If there were, then if this was the Federal Reserve, and if the Federal Reserve, controlled the coin, that's exactly what they would have done. We're going to change the monetary policy of Bitcoin like this. But there's no central party. There's no single point of control. And it's not the businesses either, because there's a whole group of holders, people that are using it as a store of value that have a say. And the way Bitcoin is designed, unless everyone upgrades at the same time and agrees to upgrade at the same time, it doesn't work. You split, and that's more or less what happened. And Bitcoin Cash was a response to that, saying, okay, well, we don't like that policy, so we're going to do our own, and we're going to have 8 megabyte blocks. And from a technological perspective, when you think about a block size increase, that is pretty much the laziest, most convenient for businesses kind of way to do it. The segwit way, which is a block size increase to 2 megabytes, is a much smarter and technologically compatible for the future kind of way to do it. And the way that the 2 megabyte blocks or 8 megabyte blocks, like you were saying, it's a very lazy way. It allows most of the businesses to not put in that many dev resources and still get a lot of the benefits. But it degrades the network security because you have half the network that may not follow you, and that's more or less what would have happened with the 2x hard fork had it gone through. But of course, the 2x people sort of abandoned it about a week before, and we stayed on as one network as a result of that. But there are better solutions. I would liken increasing the block size to just putting a tent over a part of your house and saying your house is bigger. Segwit is actually building another room or making it so that you can build lots of other rooms later. That to me is a better technological solution. And this was something that a lot of people didn't get because it was kind of technical and a lot of people didn't understand the ins and outs of that. So it became this PR battle of, okay, well, these stupid coders don't understand economics or something like that. No, I mean, I think a lot of the coders did understand the economics. It's just that a lot of the people that were advocating for 2, 4, 8 megabyte blocks didn't really understand what the code was about, or really study what upgrades this would allow. And part of what segwit fixes is transaction malleability. That's a prerequisite for the Lightning Network. And if you do the Lightning Network, you can have millions of transactions per second, and it's no problem. But people don't want to think about it that way, or they kind of got into scams, and it became like a balkanized Bitcoin, and that's more or less what's happened.
Yeah, from my perspective, it's just seeing Bitcoin quite slow and quite expensive right now really hurts Bitcoin, and so it would have been better if there was a better solution. For example, just from my perspective, and I'm no techie, you're obviously the expert here on tech, but it seems to me, why not just increase the block size more so that it wouldn't be as slow and would be cheaper in the meantime until these other solutions come out there. But you talk about the Lightning Network. What is the status of that at this moment in time? I keep hearing different stories from different people.
Yeah, they've done a test on mainnet, so they've done Lightning transactions. It's more or less about building out the network. Wallets need to support it, exchanges need to support it, and as more and more of that happens, there's now a protocol standard and everything. As more and more of that happens, and more people sort of switch over to Lightning as these fees get higher, and there's more demand for usage as a medium of exchange. That'll improve. But it's not done overnight, right? Like it's kind of like constructing a highway or something. You can say, all right, why don't we just widen the lanes, right? Like you can do that. Lightning is more like, let's put a whole system of interconnected roads and highways. It's a lot bigger, and instead of let's just widen this highway by one lane. And I think that's the right way to go from a technological standpoint. If we're building for the long term, and this is something that we always come up against with Bitcoin, is that oftentimes there's a short-term need and long-term needs, and obviously you're feeling some of the pain of the short-term and higher fee transactions. But long-term, if we build out like the Eisenhower interstate system of Bitcoin. That's going to be better long term than just increasing like one lane here, one lane there, which is what increasing block size more or less is. And I personally, I think we should build for the long term. I think we should build to like completely replace, to make it really, really fantastic instead of just like marginally better.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and you made a great point earlier that this isn't like the Federal Reserve. There isn't one guy. There isn't Janet Yellen or Ben Bernanke running it. And what we're really seeing is the free market in action, and it's so fascinating from that perspective, especially for me as an anarcho-capitalist, to see how a free market really sorts these things out. And yeah, it's messy. There's problems and forks and fights and all this sort of stuff. But it is interesting to see how it all gets worked out. In your opinion, to understand a bit more about Lightning Network, can you give us any sort of guess on time frame for Lightning Network really coming into existence, and will it lower transaction fees dramatically and speed of transactions dramatically? And give us a little bit more information on that.
Yeah, Lightning Network is just one of many different technologies that can be utilized to reduce fees. If fees is the big thing that you're worried. Fees are the big thing that you're worried about. There's something called side chains, and Blockstream's been working on something called Liquid, something called drive chains. There's obviously the Lightning Network, payment channels. A lot of that stuff works today. It's a matter of getting people to use it. It does sort of like get enhanced from the network effect. So for example, like a car isn't very useful unless you have roads that you can drive the car on. You need more of the roads to be there. The car exists more or less. Like Lightning Network transactions already exist. You can do them. People have used it for cross-chain atomic swaps with Litecoin and stuff like that. They've transferred money using the Lightning Network. It works. But you need the infrastructure there in order to make it really useful, right? Like you need roads for a car to be useful, or rails for railroad car to be useful. So I'd say all the pieces are there, but building out the infrastructure is not a 3-month task. This is a very big ecosystem that you need to build out in order to make that happen. And there's a lot of good people working very hard on that. And they're as far as time frame, I mean, like you can go to yalls.org right now and do Lightning transactions. You can write a story on there and you can get paid in Lightning transactions very easily. Like, so in a sense, it's already there, right? Like you can sort of see that as like a test city where, you know, certain roads are already there and that the cars can drive or whatever. But, you know, how long is it going to take for, you know, everything else to come into existence? I mean, I see this as like a multi-year thing, and you got to sort of have that long-term vision if you're thinking in Bitcoin. And I see this being much more heavily utilized in a year or two if it works. Then again, it could be kind of like a subway system nobody uses, right? Like that has happened in places. Who knows if that's going to happen to Lightning? Maybe side chains or drive chains or Liquid or any of these other projects that people are talking about. They turn out to be more useful. And like you were saying, this is the market at work, right? Like there's lots of options and a lot of people innovating and working really hard. And the fact that there is competition is what causes them to make a better product. And if it was just like the federal government or something like that, they'd just be like, okay, well, we're doing Lightning Network now, that's it. And, you know, it takes like forever to roll out and, you know, it has all sorts of corruption and things aren't done on time or they're done over budget or whatever. Instead, you have like several market solutions, a lot of people trying different things. And, you know, whoever gets there first is going to win. And obviously there's a need because you have people that, you know, are paying higher fees or whatever. And honestly, like, you know, having bigger blocks may be one of the solutions on a sidechain, something like that. But, you know, markets are more or less determining where this is going to go. And, you know, who knows when a particular solution will be found. But there's obviously a need and there's a lot of profit for those that can solve it. And this is how capitalism is supposed to work. This is what's beautiful about it.
I absolutely agree with that point. It's fascinating and amazing to be even just a part of what's going on. To see, you know, the amount of books that are going to be written about everything that's been happening over the last 5 or 6 years or even more it should be huge because it's, you know, just the drama of everything going on, the fights, the forking, and that's actually going to be coming up at Anarchapulco. And I'm so glad that you've agreed to speak at it. You'll be speaking at Cryptopulco, which will be on February 18th, right here. You can see it right there. There'll be a number of other sort of core proponents, including Trace Mayer there. We're also going to have people, of course, like Roger Ver of Bitcoin Cash, and actually the lead developer of Bitcoin Cash will be speaking also, and another person from Dash, because we're sort of trying to figure out what's going to become more used as a digital currency on the internet right now, and that's really sort of what this is coming down to. Is Bitcoin going to be that end sort of digital currency used in day-to-day sort of transactions, or is it going to be something else like Bitcoin Cash or Dash or Monero and things like that? All this will be all discussed at Anarchapulco and Cryptopulco. We'll have the links to those all down below. I know that, Jimmy, that you do a number of other things as well. And I think one of the things that you told me about, I think, is really interesting because as I've told viewers, and I've said this since about 2013 or so, that for all the young guys or girls out there, and if you're looking for some way to make some good money, the blockchain entire industry needs a lot of great programmers. There just isn't. And it's sort of, I was around during the internet days. I was around when the internet started, sort of when it started, after Al Gore created it in 1993, and I started an internet company then. And I remember in 1999, I had an internet company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and it was impossible to find programmers who even knew how to, you know, program web applications. Now we have the same thing with the blockchain, and I believe you are offering certain things to help that situation.
Yeah, so I saw this big gap, right? Like there's a lot of people or a lot of companies that want Bitcoin blockchain developers, and they can't find any. And there's a lot of reasons for this, not the least of which is that a lot of the people that can program this stuff, they're rich now, right? Like they don't need to work. They can go sip pina coladas in Acapulco or whatever. So
a lot of them are actually.
Yeah. So I created this course. It's a 2-day course, in person, and you know, I travel to various cities to run this course. But I teach developers to become Bitcoin developers. I start from the very basic math, finite fields, elliptic curves, and go all the way to, you know, crafting your own transaction and, you know, doing proof of work checks and SPV and everything that you need. Over the 2 days, you actually end up writing your own Python Bitcoin library. And there's a point in the second day where you create a transaction from scratch on testnet, on testnet Bitcoins that I send to the students. And that tends to be like a big highlight. But the idea is I want to create more developers, right? If this thing goes the way I think it will, I will always have work in being able to train new developers, because most of them will graduate by becoming filthy rich. So, that's the hope, is that, the market, is really hot right now. This is I liken it to the Wild West a lot, because there's tons of opportunity and tons of great things that can be done out there. You just need to have the courage and curiosity and to step out and try to do it. Everybody that's young right now, this is going to be a global wealth transfer at a scale that we've never seen. And if you want to get in on something new, something that will sort of mark your career, where you can trailblaze and make lots of money instead of walking in the steps that all your forefathers did, just like doing the same stuff for the same companies, doing those tend to require a lot more time and money. This is going to be a lot. Well, in a sense, you're going to have to work harder, but you're going to have a lot more opportunity, and the upside is a lot higher.
Yeah, it's great. So much opportunity in this space, and it's been amazing just to see how it's changed the world, the entire blockchain sort of a technology, and it's just beginning, in my opinion, as you pointed out as well. So why don't you let people know about your Twitter handle, where they can find out more about your training, anything else you want to let people know?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at Jimmy Song. That's my Twitter handle. And I also have the Programming Blockchain Seminar at programmingblockchain.com. I'm also writing a book, Programming Bitcoin for O'Reilly. It's going to more or less take the seminar and condense it to a book. That's something I was actually in the middle of writing right before this interview. So, that's on the way. I have a blog on Medium at Jimmy Song. You can follow my GitHub at Jimmy Song. Pretty much that's those are the main places you can find me.
And did you give us the website for the developing, if people want to become a blockchain developer?
Yeah, so that's programmingblockchain.com. Okay. Oh, I forgot to mention my YouTube channel, Off Chain with Jimmy Song. So I have a bunch of YouTube videos that I do every day.
That's great. We'll have the links to all those things all down below. And as I mentioned, Jimmy will be here speaking at Cryptopulco. It's at Anarchapulco, which is February 15th to the 18th. On the 18th is a full day of blockchain stuff called Cryptopulco. So if you're not interested in the freedom stuff for whatever weird reason, you like slavery and things like that, but if you're not interested in that and you just want blockchain stuff, you can just come for Cryptopulco, which is on February 18th. And we even have another day after that on February 19th, the Dollar Vigilante Investment Summit, which talks even a lot more about investment opportunities in the space. So we'll have the links to all that stuff down below. That'll be right here in just a couple months in February. And a real pleasure to have you on, Jimmy, and looking forward to seeing you here in Acapulco and looking forward to seeing what progresses with Bitcoin. It's fascinating to watch this happen in real time. So if you like this video, please like, subscribe, share down below. And that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
In a world from Acapulco, Mexico, this is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I've got a great guest coming in. It's Jimmy Song, one of the top developers for Bitcoin Core. He's got 17 commits to his name and very well known in the Bitcoin community. He's coming in from Austin, Texas. And we're going to be talking all about Bitcoin, some of the issues going on with Bitcoin right now, as we've covered before in the past about some of the issues about the expense of Bitcoin, the transaction fees, some of the time issues being quite slow. And we're also going to get into just the generality of what's so important about money and why Bitcoin is so important to the world today. And so it's going to be a great conversation. Happy to have you on, Jimmy. But before we get started, I got to ask you a question. How did you become an anarchist?
Well, I don't like labels, but I do agree with a lot of the things that anarchists stand for. Specifically, I think that governments suck at pretty much everything that they put their hands on. Like, they corrupt and make things worse for the most part.
Media, fuck the banks, fuck drone strikes, fuck tanks, fuck fuck hunger, fuck war, fuck ignoring of the poor, fuck the left, fuck the right, fuck the government. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.